When I told my sister and parents about my book deal, they said, "We didn't know you could even spell." So I sent them the first copy, with a dedication page that read, "To the people who thought I'd be nothing, watch me burn brighter than you ever imagined." Here's the story. I grew up in a small, tight-knit town where everyone's business was public knowledge. I've always been the odd one in my family. My two brothers were both in construction, my parents believed in hard work above all else, and me? Well, I had a passion for writing. I spent my childhood writing in secret because my family didn't understand. When I finally landed a book deal, I thought they'd be happy for me. But instead, they mocked me. They said they didn't even think I could spell. So, I sent them my book with a dedication page reading, "To the people who thought I'd be nothing, watch me burn brighter than you ever imagined." Here's where it all went down. I grew up in the kind of family where dreams didn't really have a place. My parents, Carl and Lorraine, were hardworking, simple people. My two brothers, David and Mark, followed the family tradition of working in construction, earning an honest living with their hands. I, however, was the dreamer. The odd one out. I spent my childhood tucked away in corners of the house, scribbling down stories and poems. It was a small house, and there weren't many corners to hide in, but I made it work. My parents always seemed to have little patience for anything that wasn't practical. "Books won't feed you," my father used to say whenever I mentioned writing in a way that felt more than just a passing hobby. "You need to get real. Focus on a job that can pay the bills." It was the same line he had given me over and over since I was 15. Even my brothers had little patience for it. David, the older of the two, would poke fun at me when I had my nose buried in a novel. "Maybe you'll write a book about the wonders of being broke," he'd tease, always with a grin, but I knew it wasn't a joke. I stopped sharing my aspirations with them years ago. No one ever asked me what I was doing, and I stopped trying to prove anything to anyone. That's why when the email came, offering me a book deal, I was both elated and terrified. After years of writing in secret, after all the rejection letters and silent disappointments, it was finally happening. A real publisher wanted my book. Not just a small-time press either, a well-known publishing house, one that had published some of my favorite authors. It wasn't just an achievement, it was validation. But telling my family about it? That was something I didn't know how to do. One evening, I finally decided to tell them. It was a casual Sunday night dinner at my parents' house, the same small house I had grown up in. I thought it was the right time, just me, my mom, my dad, and Alice, my older sister, who had flown in from the city for a visit. It felt like the moment I could finally share my success. I had the contract in my bag. The first copy of my book had arrived a few days earlier, and I had kept it in the back of my closet, hidden away, waiting for this moment. I had been so excited to tell them, to share the news. But the second I spoke, everything changed. "I signed a book deal," I said, trying to sound casual, like it was no big deal. "They're going to publish my novel." Alice was the first to speak, her voice disbelieving. "A book deal?" she repeated, as if she couldn't comprehend the idea. "What's it about?" "I didn't even know you could write." The way she said it made me freeze. There was no excitement in her voice. No pride. Just mockery. I felt my heart sink, but I didn't let it show. I had expected this. They never took me seriously. I could already see my father's face, his eyes narrowing with that look of skepticism he reserved for anything that wasn't real work. My mom just shook her head, dismissively, not even looking up from her plate. "I didn't know you could spell," she muttered under her breath. It stung more than I wanted to admit. But I didn't want them to see me hurt. Not again. David snorted, shaking his head as he picked up his fork. "Sure, Roz. That's nice. But we're all here working hard. And you're off living in some fantasy world. Good luck with that." I tried to smile. It wasn't much of a smile, more like a tight, strained expression. "Thanks," I said, my voice quiet. I couldn't bring myself to say more. I didn't want to argue with them. What was the point? They weren't going to understand. The conversation moved on, but I was already feeling the weight of their dismissal. I wasn't surprised, but it still hurt. There was nothing in their eyes but indifference. No congratulations, no curiosity about what the book was about or how I got the deal. Just a blank dismissal. I spent the rest of the evening quietly. The excitement I had felt earlier seemed to fade. It was as if my achievement was nothing to them, like it didn't even matter. I couldn't shake the feeling of inadequacy that seemed to hang in the air. But when I got home that night, I knew I had to do something. I had worked too hard for this. I had stayed up countless nights writing, revising, and editing while everyone else was sleeping or doing something productive. They had never believed in me, but I didn't need them to. I took a deep breath and sat at my desk, the contract still on my desk, the book deal still as real as it had been a few hours ago. I didn't just want to tell them they were wrong. I wanted to show them. I spent the next few hours drafting a letter to my parents, to Alice, to David, though I knew they wouldn't care. But I needed to get it out of my system. I needed to let them know that I was still here, still standing, and that I was capable of something they would never see coming. I wrote the dedication page with the words that had been boiling inside me all night, to the people who thought I'd be nothing, watch me burn brighter than you ever imagined. Then, I took the book, placed the dedication at the front, and sealed it in an envelope. I addressed it to my parents and sent it the next morning. I knew they wouldn't understand. I knew they might even get angry. But I didn't care. This was mine. My moment. And it was real. The book arrived at their house a few days later. I didn't hear anything for a while. There were no calls, no messages. But then, Alice called. And she wasn't happy. "You are unbelievable, Roz," she snapped, her voice rising with frustration. "What the hell is this about? Sending Mom and Dad a book with that dedication? You're just looking for attention. You don't even care about them." I stayed quiet. She had no idea. She didn't get it. "I'm not looking for attention," I said softly. "I just wanted them to know that I didn't need their approval." "Well, you've got it now, haven't you? You've made them angry." "Good job," she spat, before hanging up. I felt no relief. No satisfaction. Just emptiness. I didn't want their approval, but part of me still craved it. It was hard to let go of that, even after everything. But I couldn't change them. I had to live with that truth. And as time passed, I learned to accept that the only person I needed to prove anything to was myself. But that phone call wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of a long, complicated journey with my family. The next few weeks after I sent the book were a blur. On the surface, life went on. I continued with my routine, writing, editing, and adjusting to the reality of being a published author, however small that title felt at the time. The book, despite the cold reception from my family, was gaining some attention from readers I hadn't expected. It wasn't a national bestseller or anything dramatic like that, but the feedback I was getting was meaningful. It was personal, heartfelt messages from people who had connected with the story. But my family? They were still silent. Or at least, they seemed to be. There was no phone call, no acknowledgement of the book's arrival, nothing. I wasn't sure what I had expected, but it certainly wasn't the complete absence of any reaction. Not even a "thank you for sending it." Alice didn't speak to me for a while after our last conversation. I figured that was par for the course. She was always the more practical one, the one who valued appearances over substance. She'd probably written me off completely by now, and I was okay with that. I had spent my entire life trying to gain her approval, and after everything, I realized it was a fruitless pursuit. What bothered me more, though, was my parents. My mother was still the same, a quiet, calculating woman who preferred to keep things simple. She never called to ask how the book was doing, never showed any sign of interest. My father, on the other hand, was more distant than usual. I hadn't expected a parade of congratulations, but I had hoped for something, a flicker of pride, maybe. One evening, a few weeks after I'd sent the book, my father called. I picked up the phone and was immediately met with the sound of his gruff voice. He didn't start with pleasantries. "I read your book," he said, his tone matter of fact. I felt my heart race a little. "Oh, really?" I responded, trying to keep the surprise out of my voice. "What did you think?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear him shuffling papers, maybe turning the pages of the book. "Well," he started, his voice softer now, "it wasn't what I expected." The way he said it made me feel a little uneasy. It wasn't the kind of response I was hoping for, but I wanted to keep the conversation going. "In what way?" "I don't know," he continued, almost as if he were talking more to himself than to me. "It was emotional. Real. You don't write like someone who's just playing around with words. You write like you really know something about life. Maybe I misjudged you." I couldn't help the small, almost imperceptible smile that tugged at the corner of my mouth. He was acknowledging it. He was saying the words I needed to hear, even if they were only partial and reluctant. "I've worked hard for everything I have, Roz," he added, his voice shifting, more vulnerable now. "But I see now that your path, it's different from ours. And maybe that's okay. I don't get it, but I'm starting to understand." I swallowed. For the first time in years, my father's words didn't feel like criticism or disappointment. They felt like an olive branch. It wasn't a grand gesture or anything close to a complete transformation. But it was something. "I appreciate that, Dad," I said quietly. "I didn't expect you to get it, but I'm glad you took the time to read it." We didn't say much more after that. He hung up with a gruff goodbye, and I sat there staring at the phone, feeling the weight of that conversation settle over me. It wasn't the big moment of reconciliation I had once imagined, but it was progress. Maybe, just maybe, my father was starting to see that my dreams were not something to dismiss but something to respect. A few days later, my mother called. I hadn't heard from her in weeks, and I wondered if she had anything to say about the book. "Your father told me he read your book," she started, her tone flat, almost indifferent. "He says it's not bad." I could tell she was trying to keep her voice neutral, not wanting to give anything away. It was as if she didn't know how to handle this shift. My success was something foreign to her, something she didn't know how to navigate. "Thanks for telling me," I said, trying to keep the conversation light. I wasn't expecting any praise, but I wanted to hear her thoughts, even if they were brief. There was a long pause. I could hear the faint hum of the television in the background on her end. Finally, she spoke again, her voice just a bit softer. "I didn't think you could do it," she admitted, the words almost slipping out before she could catch herself. "But I'm not going to pretend that I didn't notice you worked hard. Maybe I didn't believe in it, but I see now that you've made something of yourself." The way she said it almost made my heart ache. It wasn't a resounding declaration of love or pride. It wasn't the kind of approval I had dreamed about for years. But it was something. It was the first time I had heard her acknowledge my work, not just my book, but my effort, my perseverance. "Thanks, Mom," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "That means more than you know." She didn't say much after that. The conversation ended on a quiet note, but there was something different in her tone. A change, even if small. The days that followed were a mix of silence and tentative steps forward. My family didn't rush to embrace the idea of me being an author. They didn't throw me a party or call to congratulate me every day. But slowly, the walls began to crack. It was subtle, little things like my dad telling me he'd picked up a new book to read or my mom asking if I was working on anything new. These things didn't seem like much, but to me, they meant the world. I didn't need them to become literary critics or suddenly act as though they had always believed in me. What mattered was that, for the first time, they were beginning to see me as someone who could achieve something beyond the life they had mapped out for me. And that, in itself, felt like a victory. But despite all of this, I knew there was still more to prove. More to do. My journey was far from over. I had a book to promote, a career to build, and most importantly, a life to live on my terms. There was one thing, though, that I had never anticipated when I first sent that book to my family: the slow, creeping sense of independence. I had always felt like I was tethered to their expectations, like I was waiting for their approval before I could truly feel like I was enough. But with every word I wrote, with every new chapter one added to my book and my life, I realized that I didn't need them to validate me. I had already done that for myself. And maybe, just maybe, that was the real victory. As the weeks went by, the initial discomfort of my family's cold reactions began to fade into something else. I wasn't chasing their approval anymore, but it still stung. In the quiet of my apartment, in the still moments when I wasn't distracted by the busy world of publishing and marketing, I'd catch myself wondering why I even cared so much about their opinion. I didn't need them to believe in me anymore, but that old habit of seeking validation was hard to break. Still, I had learned one important thing: I was doing this for myself, not for them. My book, slowly but surely, began to build momentum. It wasn't a wild bestseller, nothing to get me on talk shows or make my name a household one. But it was gaining a following, one reader at a time. I started receiving messages from people who had read it and found something in it that resonated with them. Those messages made all the difference. They were the validation I needed. Then one morning, I received an email from my publisher. The book had started to attract some attention from larger media outlets. It wasn't huge, but it was enough to push me into the next phase of my career. They wanted to offer me a follow-up deal. I spent the next few weeks working tirelessly on my next manuscript. It felt different this time, more confident, more assured. It was no longer about proving something to my family. It was about continuing to carve my own path, to build a future that had nothing to do with the past. I felt the weight of my family's dismissive comments lift off my shoulders with each new word I wrote. One evening, as I was finishing up an interview for a local newspaper, the phone rang. It was Alice. I hadn't spoken to her much since our last confrontation. In fact, I'd almost forgotten what it felt like to hear her voice. "Roz," she said, her voice hesitant. I saw your interview today. The one on the news." I froze, my heart skipping a beat. I had no idea my family had been watching. "Yeah?" I said, trying to keep my tone casual. "How'd it go?" "It was good." "Really good," she said, sounding almost surprised. "You're doing well, I guess." "I just didn't expect. I didn't think it was going to be like this." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Well, I guess I'm full of surprises." She paused. "Look, Roz, I just wanted to say I'm sorry. For how I treated you. For how I didn't believe in you. You've really done something with your life." "I see that now." Her words were unexpected, and I wasn't sure how to react. After everything, after the mocking, after the jabs, after the way they had dismissed me for years, it was hard to believe that my sister was actually apologizing. "Thank you," I said, my voice tight. "I appreciate that. It means a lot." There was a long pause, and for the first time in a long while, I realized I didn't need her apology to move forward. I had already found my peace, and her acknowledgement of that was just a small piece of the puzzle. It wasn't everything, but it was something. The conversation shifted to small talk after that, but I was left with a feeling I hadn't expected: closure. My sister wasn't my enemy. She was just another person who had been caught in the web of my family's unspoken expectations. We both had our own battles to fight, and maybe, just maybe, we could find a way to move forward. That night, as I was preparing to send out my next book draft, I received a package in the mail. The return address was familiar: my parents. For a moment, I hesitated. What could this be? After everything, I had expected them to simply ignore my success, to let it fade into the background of their quiet lives. I opened the package carefully. Inside was a single item: my book. But it wasn't just any copy. This one was heavily marked up with red pen. I almost laughed. They had clearly read it, probably more than once. It wasn't just a critique, though. It wasn't a criticism of the plot or the writing itself. Instead, it was filled with notes in the margins. This part made me cry: I didn't think you could write like this, I always knew you had it in you. And then, at the very bottom of the last page, written in my father's scrawled handwriting, was a single line: "You've proven us wrong, Roz. We're proud of you." I sat there staring at the page for a long time, trying to process it. My father, my mother, finally acknowledging what I had done. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't the big, dramatic moment I had once dreamed of. But it was enough. I had done it. I had succeeded despite them, and now, they could no longer ignore it. They had been forced to see me for who I really was, not the disappointment they had once believed me to be, but a woman who had fought for her dreams and had made them come true. It felt like the ultimate form of quiet revenge. Not the kind of revenge I had once fantasized about: no cruelty, no grand gestures. But something more satisfying. The revenge of success. The revenge of proving them wrong, not with anger or hatred, but with the quiet confidence that I had made something of myself. I didn't need them to acknowledge it, but I had earned it. And now they knew. They couldn't take that from me. Over the next few months, things between my family and me began to shift. There was a kind of tentative respect that grew between us, born out of my determination and my refusal to be anything less than what I had always dreamed of being. We never became close in the way I had hoped when I was younger, but I no longer felt the constant need to win their approval. I had already won the most important victory, the one that mattered most to me. I kept writing, kept growing, and when my second book was finally released, it was met with even more success. And, for the first time, when I called my parents to share the news, they didn't scoff. They didn't belittle me. They simply congratulated me. And that was all I needed. The quiet satisfaction of knowing that I had burned brighter than they ever imagined, that was enough.